Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba is calling for Russia to face a war crimes tribunal before participating in a peace summit in early 2023, according to a new interview with the Associated Press. Ukraine is hoping to convene a peace summit by the end of February 2023, with the United Nations as the ideal host, but Kuleba said Russia wouldn't get an invite if Moscow doesn't submit to a war crimes tribunal in international court first. They can only be invited to this step in this way, Kuleba told the AP. Every war ends in a diplomatic way. Every war ends as a result of the actions taken on the battlefield and at the negotiating table, Kuleba said, adding that the country is focused on ending the war in the new year. Kuleba indicated that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, whom he called a man of principle and integrity, could be a possible mediator for the peace summit. It would likely follow a 10-point peace plan Zelensky presented at the Group of 20 summit in Bali, Indonesia last month. Moscow leaders have said they're prepared for peace talks, but Kuleba expressed doubt. They regularly say they are ready for negotiations, which is not true, because everything they do on the battlefield proves the opposite. Kuleba's comments follow Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's historic visit to the U.S. last week, when he stopped by the White House and gave an unprecedented address to a joint session of Congress. Days later, Congress passed its massive government funding bill, which included some $45 billion in aid for Ukraine as its war with Russia went on. The Pentagon pledged another $1.85 billion and the use of the U.S. Patriot missile system to shore up Ukraine's air defense. The foreign minister told the AP he was absolutely satisfied with Zelensky's trip. Ukraine has long accused Russia of war crimes amid the fighting. Zelensky said last month that more than 400 war crimes were documented in occupied Kherson alone, and the president's office has been pushing for a tribunal to prosecute Russia. The cities and villages destroyed by Russia, destroyed destinies, broken and executed lives, should be reflected in this sentence, not only for those who directly committed all this, but also in the sentences for those who organized and started this aggression, Zelensky said earlier this month. It is necessary to turn it into reality as soon as possible, the president said of the tribunal. So I'm all for an international court actually going after countries that commit war crimes, because I've said repeatedly, while I think Zelensky has sometimes been a little too hard in the paint when it comes to not wanting a peace deal, and we discussed that before, I fully commit to the belief that Russia committed war crimes by invading Ukraine. And what I've been frustrated by is that a lot of times when the U.S. does the same thing, whether it was when we went to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, or rather we participated in the Saudi Arabia led intervention there seems to be a complete silence when we do it, but then suddenly when there's a country with a lot of oil or some other thing that is to our financial benefit, we care and are concerned when somebody else is doing it. But what was said in this article is correct, that a lot of times Russia says they're ready for negotiations while they're massacring and missiling and bombing various people around the same region that they supposedly want to make peace with. And I agree with Kuleba's assessment of the UN Secretary General, but I don't know how this is going to work, because on the one hand, you have Zelensky, who I'm sympathetic toward. I think, it's hard to lead a country that's much smaller than another one that's being invaded by the much bigger one. You have him who's trying to, or rather presenting ways that he would like to come to some kind of peace deal. But then you have Russia bombing and blowing up and destroying things in the same country that it's also saying it wants to have peace with. So the only solution I can think of is if they, and I haven't read the peace plan, but the only thing I can think of is they need to find some way to get to put within their conditions to even sit down with these people. Hey, look, if you want to have peace with Ukraine, why don't you stop bombing them first? And I swear, sometimes I forget the tribunal even exists because there are so many war crimes that never get talked about, reported, or discussed at all. I mean, look at what the Israeli government did to Palestinians decade after decade. I mean, look at the Gaza Strip from what, 8 years ago. Um, Look at what Saudi Arabia has done to Yemen. Look at the U.S.'s involvement over there. And I mean, we could sit here all day and talk about interventions that America had, but that no one ever went to jail or was prosecuted for. But it's just so disturbing to me that we have international bodies that are supposed to, come out and say, hey, look, you're committing a war crime. You're doing something that is illegal. You have an illegal, offensive conflict, um, and it needs to stop. And the people who are behind it should be given some kind of penalty. Really, all that happens is they wag their finger, and then no one who actually is in charge of starting this conflict gets any kind of sentence. Putin is not going to jail or prison after this conflict is over, or if the tribunal finds him guilty of a war crime, which, if they have any sense of basic reasoning, they probably will. Um, I mean, like, and I hate to compare real life with literary devices, but a lot of these heads of states, and we can call them foreign ministers, the U.S. Secretary of State, these people have this insane amount of plot armor when it comes to actually being held accountable for doing things or initiating conflicts that have cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lives. Um, it's it's just really disgusting, and I do feel bad for Ukraine civilians. Like, again, I've had my problems with Zelensky. I think the U.S. has thrown itself a little too far into this, um, but I have nothing but sympathy for the people that are over there, and I really hope that these other countries, if they're actually going to get involved, find some way to set up a peace deal where one of the preconditions is stop murdering the people that you apparently want to live in Russia after they survive getting blown to pieces by your weaponry. And I hope the war ends this year. I don't it, it I'm not going to say it's a forever war because it has been going on as long as something like Afghanistan did with 20 years, but uh, 1 year turns into two, and then two turns into five. It's not hard for this stuff to get dragged out, and it just seems like we're spinning our wheels. So we'll see what happens.